One team just dropped a bombshell in Formula One, and Red Bull did not see it coming. Right after the season opener in Australia, Ferrari revealed a radical upgrade for the SF-26 that could completely change the balance of power before the Chinese Grand Prix. A rear wing so extreme, it does not just open like a normal system. It rotates, almost flipping its aerodynamic profile while the car is flying down the straight. Engineers estimate this design could unlock up to 10 km/h of extra top speed when it enters straight-line mode. In Formula One, that kind of gain is enormous. It means easier overtakes, stronger defense, and a completely different race strategy. But here is where the story becomes explosive. The moment Ferrari confirmed they were bringing this Macarena rear wing to China, the reaction inside the paddock was immediate. Engineers started analyzing every detail. Teams began asking the FIA technical questions. And according to several paddock insiders, Red Bull quickly realized something very uncomfortable. If Ferrari's system works exactly as expected, the SF-26 might suddenly become the fastest car on every long straight in Formula One. And the real reason Red Bull started to panic comes from something that happened during the Australian Grand Prix, a detail almost nobody noticed. The Australian Grand Prix looked like a normal season opener. New cars, new regulations, and one of the biggest stories in modern Formula One. Lewis Hamilton starting his first race as a Ferrari driver. But while fans were watching the battle on track, something far more important was happening inside the garages. Engineers were studying the numbers, speed traces, energy deployment, aerodynamic drag. Because the 2026 regulations changed one fundamental thing in Formula One. Efficiency now decides races. Less drag means more speed. More speed means more overtaking opportunities. And during the race in Melbourne, Ferrari looked extremely strong in some areas. The SF-26 launched well off the line. The car had excellent traction out of slow corners. Through medium speed sections, it looked stable and predictable. Both Ferrari drivers were pushing with confidence. Leclerc looked aggressive. Hamilton looked comfortable in a car he had only recently started learning. For many fans watching the broadcast, Ferrari looked like a genuine contender immediately. But when engineers started analyzing the telemetry after the race, a different picture appeared. On the longest acceleration zones, Ferrari was quick. Very quick. But not the quickest. Some rivals were reaching slightly higher terminal speeds. And one team in particular stood out. Red Bull. Not by a massive margin. Nothing dramatic on television. But enough to make Ferrari engineers uncomfortable. Because in Formula One, small advantages repeated lap after lap become very dangerous. A few extra kilometers per hour on every straight changes overtaking windows. It changes battery deployment. It changes defensive strategy. And Ferrari realized something very quickly after Australia. Their car had strong balance, strong traction, strong corner performance. But on circuits with very long straights, they needed something more. More efficiency, less drag, more speed. And that realization triggered a decision inside Maranello that nobody outside the team expected so early in the season. Because Ferrari already had a radical solution waiting. A concept they had quietly tested months earlier during the Bahrain pre-season tests. A rear wing so unusual that many engineers originally believed it would appear much later in the championship. But after Australia, Ferrari changed the plan. They accelerated development. They prepared different versions of the system. And they made a bold decision. They would bring the Macarena rear wing to the Chinese Grand Prix. And the moment that information began spreading through the paddock, Red Bull engineers immediately understood the potential consequences. Because they knew something most fans had not realized yet. If Ferrari's new rear wing worked exactly as simulations suggested, the entire competitive balance of the 2026 season could start shifting much sooner than anyone expected. But the moment rival engineers truly understood how this rear wing behaves, the mood inside the paddock changed. Because this was not just another aerodynamic tweak. It was something far more radical. During the Bahrain tests earlier in the year, Ferrari quietly ran an experimental version of this concept. At the time, many teams assumed it was simply a prototype. Something interesting, yes, but probably too extreme to use regularly during the season. But what Ferrari revealed later changed that perception completely. Because the Macarena rear wing does not behave like a normal active system. Traditional drag reduction systems simply open a small slot in the rear wing. Air flows through the gap. Drag decreases slightly. Top speed increases a little. Ferrari looked at that concept and pushed it much further. Instead of opening a slot, the SF-26 rear wing rotates. And not by a few degrees. By an enormous amount. When the car exits a corner and enters straight-line mode, the main plane of the wing can rotate between roughly 180 degrees and almost 270 degrees. That means the aerodynamic profile of the wing almost flips completely. In corner mode, the wing generates strong downforce. The rear of the car stays planted, stable, predictable. But the moment the driver accelerates onto a straight, the system activates. The wing rotates. The airflow around the rear of the car reorganizes instantly. And the most important effect appears. Drag almost disappears. Engineers inside the paddock began describing the system using two very simple expressions: corner mode and flight mode. Because when the wing rotates into its straight-line configuration, it almost generates lift instead of downforce, dramatically reducing air resistance. And that is exactly what Ferrari wanted. Speed. A lot of speed. Some technical estimates suggest the system could deliver between 8 and 10 km per hour more top speed compared with more traditional active wings. In Formula 1 terms, that is enormous. That difference can decide overtakes before the braking zone even arrives. It can allow a driver to attack without draining as much battery energy. And it can make defending almost impossible for the car ahead. The moment rival teams realized how aggressive this concept was, engineers across the paddock began running their own simulations, trying to understand exactly what would happen on a circuit like Shanghai. Because the Chinese Grand Prix is not just another track. It is one of the most revealing circuits for aerodynamic efficiency. The lap begins with long, sweeping corners that require stable downforce. But then comes the famous back straight, a massive full throttle section that stretches for more than a kilometer. Drivers remain flat out for several seconds. And during that time, aerodynamic drag becomes the most important factor on the entire car. If Ferrari's Macarena system truly enters what engineers describe as flight mode during that straight, the SF-26 could suddenly gain several extra kilometers per hour compared with its rivals. That means later braking, more overtakes, more pressure on the cars ahead. And that is exactly why Red Bull engineers started looking at the concept with growing concern. Because Red Bull has built its entire reputation around aerodynamic mastery. Their cars traditionally dominate through corners. They maintain excellent balance and efficiency across different circuits. But if Ferrari suddenly discovered a way to erase drag more effectively than anyone else on the straights, that advantage could disappear very quickly. Imagine the situation. A Red Bull exits the final corner slightly ahead of a Ferrari. Normally that position would be safe. But if the Ferrari suddenly gains several extra kilometers per hour halfway down the straight, the overtake becomes inevitable. And once engineers inside the paddock started calculating that scenario, the conversation changed. Because if the Macarena wing truly delivers the performance Ferrari expects, the advantage would not only appear in China. It could become a powerful weapon on multiple circuits. Baku, Monza, Las Vegas, Spa. Any track with long straights suddenly becomes extremely dangerous for Ferrari's rivals. And that is exactly the moment when Red Bull began asking a very important question. Not whether the idea was clever, but whether the regulations were ever meant to allow something this extreme. And this is where the story stops being just about aerodynamics. Because in Formula 1, the moment one team introduces something revolutionary, two battles begin at the same time. The battle on the track, and the battle behind the scenes. When Ferrari confirmed that the Macarena rear wing would arrive at the Chinese Grand Prix, rival engineers immediately began studying every detail of the concept. How quickly the wing rotates. How the aerodynamic load changes during activation. How the structure behaves under high-speed airflow. Because when a component rotates through such a large angle, engineers start worrying about something very sensitive in Formula 1. Aeroelasticity. That is the phenomenon where aerodynamic forces slightly deform parts of the car under load. Sometimes the deformation is tiny, almost invisible. But even a small flex can create aerodynamic effects that the regulations did not originally intend. And Formula 1 has a long history with this problem. Flexible front wings, moving floors, rear wings bending under load. Every generation of regulations eventually discovers a gray area. So when Ferrari revealed a rear wing capable of rotating nearly 270 degrees, engineers across the paddock immediately started asking deeper questions. How stable is the structure at full speed? Does the wing behave exactly the same under aerodynamic load? Could it flex slightly while rotating? None of those questions automatically mean the design is illegal. But they place the concept right on the edge of the regulatory interpretation. And that is where Red Bull stepped in. Because Red Bull engineers have built their success on two things: extreme aerodynamic innovation, and extreme attention to the smallest details of the rulebook. The moment Ferrari's concept started circulating through the paddock, Red Bull began analyzing it aggressively. Not only from a performance perspective, but from a regulatory perspective. Because if the Macarena wing truly delivered the performance Ferrari expected, the consequences could be huge. The SF-26 would suddenly become extremely powerful on tracks with long straights. Overtaking would become easier. Defending would become easier. And Ferrari drivers could control races in a completely different way. But more importantly, the advantage would not be easy for rivals to copy quickly. Designing a rotating aerodynamic structure like this requires months of engineering, wind tunnel validation, structural testing, software integration. Under the budget cap, that kind of redesign cannot happen overnight. Which means if Ferrari gained a large advantage early in the season, it could take several races before rivals respond. That is why Red Bull did not want to wait. According to several paddock insiders, technical discussions with the FIA began almost immediately after Ferrari's plans became clear. Not a formal protest. Not an official accusation. But a growing wave of technical questions. Questions about rotation limits. Questions about structural behavior. Questions about how the regulations interpret such a dramatic aerodynamic transformation. Because once the cars arrived in Shanghai, there would be no hiding the truth. The Chinese Grand Prix is the perfect circuit to expose aerodynamic efficiency. Long sweeping corners demand stability. But the enormous back straight reveals every weakness in drag performance. Drivers remain flat out for several seconds. And during those seconds, even a small aerodynamic advantage becomes obvious. If Ferrari's Macarena system works exactly as their engineers believe, the SF-26 could suddenly appear much faster at the end of that straight. And if that happens, the reaction from rivals like Red Bull could become much louder. Because in Formula One, innovation always creates pressure. Pressure to copy. Pressure to challenge. Pressure to redefine the rules. And the real question now is no longer whether Ferrari built something clever. The real question is much bigger. Did Ferrari just create the most powerful aerodynamic weapon of the 2026 season? Or did they trigger the next technical war in Formula One?